Okay, so now that we have extracted phonemes and extracted morphemes and segmented words, now we need to understand how the words are threaded together in a sentence. And this is the domain of syntax. Now, by syntax, we mean the way in which categories of words can be combined together and sequenced in order to generate meaningful phrases and sentences. And notice that I'm highlighting the fact that the rules of syntax don't apply to individual words, but they apply to categories of words. So rules apply to nouns, verbs, prepositions, that sort of thing. They don't apply to individual words. Now, I mentioned this at the beginning of this lecture, but one of the founding intuitions in the understanding of language as a mental phenomenon is the idea that although language manifests itself as a linear signal, something that you hear word by word and that unfolds over time, in our minds, we are actually building a rich abstract relationship of how each discrete element in the sentence fits and connects to each other element. Let me give you an example. So the idea is that as you read this sentence here, which unfolds over time, in your mind, what you're doing is you're constructing this hierarchical relationship of how each piece connects to each other piece. And importantly, the way in which you connect the individual elements determines how you interpret and how you understand what is being said. Just to give you an example, you hear the girl, and these two instantly get put into a unit. Okay, so this is also known as a phrase structure tree, although we're not going to get into the details of it. That's for a linguistics or a psycholinguistics class, if you're interested. But you hear this, and the girl go together, and those form a unit. And then, for example, the boy also forms a unit. Open the door also forms a unit. And these trees just represent, in a visual manner, the way in which we connect and then understand a sentence. And so you might remember from the beginning of this lecture that I told you, isn't it odd that we read this sentence and we immediately know, as long as you are a proficient speaker of English, that who is opening the door is the girl. Isn't it odd? I mean, the girl is so far away from the verb phrase, open the door. In fact, if you just start the sentence here, if you only read from here, there actually is the well-formed, so grammatical fragment, the boy opened the door. Why is it that despite there being the well-formed fragment right here, the boy opened the door, we spontaneously understand the sentence as meaning that it's the girl who's opening the door? And see, the answer is that that's because of how we connect these elements. In fact, given the sentence and given the rule of the English language, we are forced to interpret it this way. We could not read it would make no sense to read the sentence and understand it as the boy being the one opening the door. And I'll give you a couple more examples that would make this a little bit clearer. But again, the idea is that in our minds, we build these rich structures of how each piece connects to each other piece. And based on that, we understand the meaning of a sentence. Now, is this real? Is there a psychological reality to the idea that we build these structures in our mind, and that's how we assign meaning to sentences? Well, one example, a classic example, comes from Chomsky. And take this sentence: sleepless green ideas sleep furiously. Is it grammatically correct? Looks like it, right? You could replace each of those words with sort of a semantically appropriate word of the same category, and it would make total sense. Sleepless, cute babies play furiously, right? I just substituted each of those words with a different word from the same category. Totally fine sentence. Does this sentence mean something? I don't think so. Difficult to understand what idea, what state of affairs it's trying to convey. But there's no doubt that you read this sentence and you thought grammatically it works. As I said, as proof, I can replace each of those words with a word, an appropriate word from the same category, and it will work perfectly. Right? So this is already telling you that syntax in our mind might exist in of itself, separate from the individual meanings that we that we assign to each of those words. Here's another example from Lewis Carroll, from a poem known as Jabberwocky. Was brilling and the slithy tubs, the gyre and gimble in the wave. Does it mean something? I don't think so. At least I don't understand what it means. Most of these words are actually pseudo words, sort of things that sound like words but are not. But is it grammatical? Yeah, absolutely, right? I read this and I'm ready to accept that this is a perfectly well-formed sentence. It just doesn't mean anything. And so again, syntax seems to live, by itself, seems to be in of itself a real construct inside our mind. Take this other sentence. Wabe thee in gimble and the tuvs slithy and the brilling twas. Is this one grammatically correct? Syntactically correct? I don't think so. I read this and it just feels like a word salad. In fact, this is the exact, it's the same sentence as the one before. I'm just reading it backwards. Now, it's odd because in both cases, these are meaningless sentences. They don't convey any meaning. Yet, it's immediately clear that the first one sounds right in terms of its construct. The second one, the syntax just sounds wrong. If I replaced each of these words with an appropriate, semantically, word of the same category, it probably would still be grammatically incorrect. So again, there's an argument in favor of the existence of syntax as its own thing in our mind, as its own mental phenomenon. And see, here's where it becomes important. Take this sentence. The girl looked at the boy with the telescope. You'll immediately realize that this sentence is ambiguous. It can be interpreted in one of two ways. Either the girl is using a telescope to look at the boy, or the girl is looking at a boy who happens to be holding a telescope. And the contention is that these two interpretations are based on different ways of connecting the elements. So, for example, if you connect the elements in this way, and once again, we're not going to get into any of these details, that's for some other class. But if you connect it as the girl looked at the boy with the telescope, and I'm using my voice to sort of isolate the different units and how you put them together, then you're inferring that the girl is using a telescope to look at a boy. But if you instead parsed this sentence as the girl looked at the boy with the telescope, and again, I'm using my voice to kind of mark these clusters, now you're thinking that the girl is looking at a boy and the boy happens to be holding a telescope. So again, the contention is that as we hear a sentence in our own mind, we build these rich hierarchical representations of how each item connects to each other item, and according to how we build them, we understand what is being said differently, as in the case of these two different trees. Now, there are many examples of the reality of syntax as its sort of own part of the mental phenomenon of language and the complexity of parsing this sentence. Just a few sort of funny ones that make the point. I once shot an elephant in my pajamas. How I got in my pajamas, I'll never know. And of course, here Groucho Marx is using the very type of ambiguity we saw a moment ago with the girl looking at the boy with the telescope, because you can interpret the sentence either as being that Groucho Marx shot an elephant while Groucho Marx was in his pajamas, or he shot an elephant in my pajamas, meaning the elephant happened to have snuck in to his pajamas, and that's when the deadly event happened. And of course, the news newspapers are a wonderful source of these kind of things. Here's a few examples I collected over time. Complaints about NBA referees growing ugly. Who's growing ugly is ambiguous. Dr. Ruth to talk about sex with newspaper editor. This is also ambiguous. Teachers strike idle kids is a very funny one. Juvenile court tries a shooting defendant is particularly funny. Squad helps dog bite victim. And of course, it's either squad helps dog bite victim. So Either a squad helps somebody who's the victim of a dog bite, or squad helps dog bite victim. So the squad is helping the dog biting a victim. But my new favorite one happened to me 2 weeks ago, as some of my research had sort of some small media appearance for a brief instant. And this is the actual title of the UCLA newsroom press release, which says, "Scientists jumpstart two people's brains after coma." And I didn't notice this at first, but upon reading this twice, it's immediately clear that it's actually highly ambiguous who was in a coma. You can either interpret this as scientists jumpstart two people's brains after they were in a coma, the two people, or you could actually read this as scientists jumpstart two people's brains after the scientists were in a coma. So it's a sort of a very nice example of the reality of syntax and how syntax determines, in large part, how we assign meaning to strings of words. Now, another important type of ambiguity is so-called garden path sentences. And see, these also allow us to highlight the mechanisms by which our minds seem to process verbal information and its syntactic aspect in particular. Let me give you an example. Do me a favor, look at the screen and read the sentence as it appears, because it'll help you understand what a garden path sentence is. And see, what I think happened to you is that you were reading the sentence and you were thinking the horse raced past the barn, and you were thinking there's a horse that is racing past the barn, and then you get fell, and that fell just doesn't work. Right? Here's another one. Again, right? You started reading the sentence and you read the man returned to his home, and you're thinking this is its own thing. You know, there's a man who's returning to his home, and then you get was happy, and was happy just doesn't work. Here's just two more examples. The old man, the ship. This one also weird, right? Because you were thinking the old man, and then you get the ship. You were not expecting a noun phrase. You were expecting a verb, or you were expecting something to happen to this old man, right? Instead, the meaning of this is the old are manning the ship, right? But that's not, if you understood that by yourself, what you probably did is you were reading along. Once you got to the ship, you thought, wait, what? And you went back and you had to somehow create a new parse of this sentence. And that's the whole point of garden path sentences. The initial parse, the way in which you initially, so as you read, you start creating this, this hierarchical relationship of how everything fits with everything else. And you build it in a certain way until you suddenly reach an impasse. For example, here you reach the ship, and now you realize that that just doesn't make sense. And so you have to go back and you have to think, okay, let me try to create a different syntactic tree that would actually accommodate all of these words. And my personal favorite, time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana. Once you get to fruit flies like a banana, you have to go back and reinterpret how you understood time flies like an arrow.